So the next thing we want to do is attach the foot to our box, but that's going to be a lot easier to do if we have our lid already positioned onto our box. So I'm going to start off by just looking on the inside of my box, and at this point maybe going back in and blending my rim a little bit better, cleaning up any surface areas that I want cleaned up before my box dries out too much more. And when I put water along the rim to find my flange marks, I kind of messed up my rim here, so I want to make sure that I go back in and clean that up a little bit. You could also go back in with a stiff blending brush. Just be very careful that you don't add too much water to the clay, just a little bit. A modeling tool, you can scrape some things. So I'm noticing on the inside of my box, I have some rough corners from when I blended my seams. So I may go back in with my modeling tool a little bit more and scrape a little bit more. Can always go back in with my corner tool also, just cleaning some things up. Remember to always support the walls on the outside when you're working on the inside, and vice versa. If you were working on the outside, make sure you're supporting the interior walls so you don't distort them, especially now that we have our flange attached to our lids. Okay, so right now, after I've done that, the surface of my box is a little bit wet. I'm going to let that dry for just a couple of minutes, and then I'll show you how to put the lid on. Okay, so that feels like it's probably dry enough. I'm going to take a piece, well actually I'm going to start off by stuffing the inside of my box with some dry paper towel. This is just going to help the walls to hold their form. So I'm just doing this kind of loosely so that it fills the inside of the box, kind of like this. And then I'm going to take, I'm going to take a piece of dry paper towel and I'm going to place it going across the top of my box like this. Okay, so it's over the top of my box. And then I'm going to carefully try to fit my lid onto my box with that dry piece of paper towel in between. So the flange goes down. And again, if it doesn't fit the first time, so if I set this down and it doesn't fit, don't force it. Try moving it back and forth and see if you can get it to fit. If not, pick it up, try it a couple of different ways. So mine looks like it's fitting pretty well, and I can tell. I'm going to lift this paper towel up and carefully turn this. Let's see here. Probably should add a piece of paper towel underneath, or a piece of paper underneath there. Okay, so I want to just show you. One second. All right, so there's my piece of paper towel. And you can see that the lid is flat down. The piece of paper towel is going through it. And the purpose of that is just to make sure that your lid doesn't stick to the inside of your walls. So this way we'll be able to remove the lid later. All right. Now I'm also noticing that when I had my lid set down, it got some crumbs stuck on it, maybe some scuff marks. So I'm going to take a few minutes right now and I'm going to blend my lid just a little bit better. I'm just going to use my fingers. if you had carved your lid, if you did the project where you carve your lid, you'll want to be careful, obviously, the whole time you're putting your flange on and your lid, but you probably won't have to go over your lid exactly like I'm doing right here. This is more because I don't have anything on top of there, so you may just have to go in and just blend areas that might need to be blended. Okay. All right, so the next step is going to be to attach your foot. Now, again, if you have carved your lid, at this point, if you've just carved it and you've not added anything onto it and it's still pretty flat, you can still do what I'm about to show you. If you've already added some things on and your box lid is kind of dimensional, then I would recommend that you carefully take your lid off before you attach your foot, but keep the inside stuffed with paper towels so that it can help hold its form. Okay, so I'm going to just carefully flip my box. Now I have a piece of paper underneath this, so let's see if I can hold my hand. I'm actually going to change my camera angle a little bit, I think, so that you can see the foot a little bit better. So I'm going to pause here and come back at a different camera angle. Okay, so this seems to be a little bit better. We'll see how this camera angle goes. So I still have my lid on top. Notice that I have a piece of paper that my box is sitting on. So when I grab my box, I'm just going to carefully slide my piece of paper towards me so that I can then catch. I'm going to slide my hand underneath my box so that it's sliding from my banding wheel onto my hand. Once it's on my hand, I'm going to make sure that I have another piece of paper towel or scrap paper handy to lay this back down on. You also are going to want to make sure there's nothing on your banding wheel. All right, so I'm just going to carefully, I'm going to put my hand like this, and I'm going to carefully flip. Actually, I'm going to take my piece of paper on top, okay, like this, and then I'm going to flip this over. And then I'm going to carefully lay this down on the banding wheel on the lid. So I'm going to start off the banding wheel a little bit and then slide it on. And again, I would only do that if I hadn't yet added any clay onto my lid. And then I take that piece of paper off. So now we're looking at the bottom of our box. And this is where we're going to be attaching our foot. At this point, as I'm thinking ahead, and forgive me, this is just occurring to me right now, but I want you to be able to see the walls a little bit on the box and not just the bottom. So I'm going to readjust my camera angle again, and I think we'll get it this time. All right, so I think this camera angle might be a little bit better for us to see, but it's also occurring to me that I have yet to finish my foot slab pieces, so they're still rough cut. So I'm gonna pause again, and I'm going to off camera smooth out my slabs, cut them to template for my foot, and then I'll come right back and show you how to attach these. All right, so I have my foot pieces cut out. I just cut them to template. I compressed them and cut them to template. I haven't blended any of my edges yet. I'll do that after I attach these. So I'm starting with just two of my foot pieces so that you can see. I'm going to construct this almost the exact same way that I constructed my flange, only I'm going to do it directly on my base. So the first thing that I want to do, I want to be very careful with my foot. I want to make sure that my foot is supporting my base enough that it can hold the weight of my box without my base sinking in, right? So lining up our foot is going to be important. So I want the outside edge of my foot, so this outside edge, to be in line with the outside edge of the wall. So if I were to look at this straight on, it would almost look like a straight line going up the side of my box to the edge of my foot. I'm going to look at it directly on to make sure that it's going straight and it's parallel with this side of my box also. So the way I'm sitting, I have to turn this a little bit. And I'm just kind of scratched down a little bit looking from the side. I'm also going to turn my box here in a minute and look at it from the other direction just to make sure that it is still lined up going that way as well. So now I want to look at that end. So I'm going to bring this end closer to me. I'm going to look at this end here and make adjustments if I see an adjustment needs to be made. Just doing a little bit at a time. And then I'll just go back one more time and look at the other side. Make sure I didn't throw it off. Okay, so this one looks good to me, so that one's done. Now I'm going to look at this one, and again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to line up the outside of the foot with the outside of the wall. I find that it helps me to close one eye when I'm doing things like this. It helps me to see better. I also want to make sure that my foot is kind of centered, that I have enough space for my other two slabs foot pieces. Right, so it looks good. So now I'm going to take my other two pieces and I'm doing the same thing. So I'm still looking at, so this is going to go across this way. Okay. And your foot pieces should just about make a square. So these edges should join together. And if we lined it up right, it should, that vertical line should go straight down. Again, I'm going to adjust as needed. Okay, so once I have my foot pieces lined up, and again, they're coming together to create corners. So to spin this, you should see that they're coming together to create corners. So we're going to cut just like we did our flange, where we're finding our inside corner and our outside corner, and we're going to use our fettling knife to cut straight down. Be very careful when you do this that you don't cut too far down into your base. I would stand, look down upon it so that you can see it from above and really take your time. Especially if you don't have your lid on your box. Be very careful at this point. And in fact, if you don't have your lid on your box, I think it would be best if you, at this point, carefully take your pieces off of your bottom and construct it off the side like we did on the flange. So you just try to keep this together, maybe put it on a piece of paper. That way you're not putting too much pressure on the rims of your, or the walls rather, of your box. You can call me over and I'll look at it to make sure it's going to be sturdy enough. I would also make sure we make all the cuts before we start pulling the little pieces off. So I did make a couple little marks in the bottom here. Nothing too deep, something I'll be able to fill in with my stiff blending brush. So at this point, it's safe to get rid of all these extra pieces and make sure that our foot fits. Okay, once I have my cut made, I'm just gonna go back and just make sure that this looks like it's centered on my base. So I'm gonna look at it again from above. And at this point I can move it a little bit to adjust it to get it as centered as possible. The pieces may have stuck a little bit, so I'm just kind of gently pulling up on them so they can be moved a little bit easier. There we go. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Okay, so once I'm pretty happy with the way my foot is placed, I'm going to look at it from the side also, just in case something's off. All right, so the next step is to trace around the outside and inside of the foot with my wooden scribe tool. Now I'm gonna just lift up one piece at a time. I'm not gonna take all of these off of here. I'm gonna lift up one piece at a time and slip and score it on. So I'll start with this piece right here. So I'm just gonna carefully remove this piece. And then maybe I'll just lay it down right in front of me, so I remember how it goes back on. And then I will score the clay on the inside here. I want to make sure that I'm scoring the clay really well for this so that my slabs don't warp. I'm also going to score the bottom of my foot, and just make sure you're scoring the correct side. Now I'm also going to score my beveled edges that I created when I cut through. So my slanted edges, I'll also score. When I add the slip, I'm not going to add the slip to my edges yet. I'm only going to add the slip to the bottom two pieces, the wider pieces. So, slip brush. So I'm just going to add slip to here and here. I'll get my edges in a minute. And then I'm just going to carefully lay this down, line it back up. And I'm kind of lining it back up with the line that I drew and back in place with my other foot pieces. And then I'm going to carefully pull off, actually both this side, and I'm just going to flip it over and put it down on my banding wheel, and the opposite side, just so that the slip doesn't make those stick on there. And then my piece that I just attached, I'm just going to adjust it a little bit, and I'm going to press down gently just to make sure that's sticking on there nicely. We don't want any space in between the foot. We want to make sure that it's sitting flat and not going to warp. So I like to just kind of press gently. Let the slip kind of ooze out of the seams a little bit. And then I'm going to move on to my next piece, which will be right here. At this point, I can add a little bit of slip here because I'm going to be joining the wall that's next to it. And then the same thing on this side. I can add a little bit of slip there. I'm going to take off this last piece here. Let's get that one out of the way. And then where this corner is attaching together here, I'm going to try to get that as close together as possible. So I'm just going to on the surface, like on the top, just kind of pushing my fingers together along that seam to help pull them together. You should see a little bit of slip oozing out of the seam. That's what we want. And then I'm just going to make sure everywhere else looks good. Gently pressing down. See how that slip's oozing out? And I'm going to go ahead and attach my last two walls. Okay, so I'm going to clean up. I'm going to let my slip dry just a little bit. This still needs to be cleaned up more. My edges still need to be cleaned up a lot better. So, but it's easier to do that once the slip dries just a little bit. So once it's no longer shiny, I'll come back and I'll show you how to clean up the foot. Okay, so at this point I've let my slip dry for about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit less. I don't want my clay to dry out too much. I just want to make sure the slip isn't like just freshly applied. So I'm going to go back in now with my stiff blending brush, and I'm going to blend all of my seams, and I'm also going to blend what my joins here. You can actually go over that a little bit with a modeling tool first. So maybe I'll go in with my modeling tool first, and using this tool, I can just kind of blend the seam a little bit, scrape it, make sure it's even. So again, maybe using the flat side and just kind of scraping and blending. I like to go at it kind of an angle too. Try not to distort the foot, like I'm not applying a lot of pressure, I'm just gently blending. I'll do a little bit more with my stiff blending brush too. You do want to make sure your tools are clean when you're doing this. Okay, so now I'm going to go in with my stiff blending brush, now that I have my seams taken care of a little bit better. And again, remember to make sure that you blot some of the water off of the brush. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to blend this edge. I'm just going to go back and forth like I did on my flange. And then I'm also going to clean up any scored marks that might be on the base. And then I like to take this time to just maybe even look at that edge that you can see of the base. Just be careful that you're not creating like a really lot of like a big buildup of slip. We don't want this to get too wet. So I'm just going over it until that kind of dries on there. And then I'll do the same thing like at my seam here also. And I'm going to go at different directions just to help kind of blend that in a little bit better. All right, so we're trying to make this as seamless as possible. All right, so that looks pretty good. The surface of my clay right now is pretty soft because I went over it with water. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let mine dry again for a few minutes, probably like 5 more minutes. Once this isn't quite so tacky, like if you could see I'm leaving like fingerprints on here. So once I'm no longer like leaving fingerprints, then I can come back in and I can just kind of soften some of my edges. And once my clay is at dry leather hard, which my base is getting close right now, I'm going to not turn this over yet, but once my base is dry leather hard, I'm sorry, I can carve my name and class code. I don't want to set this on its foot just yet because the clay is still kind of soft. So once the slip dries up a little bit and then I go back in and blend, we should be able to turn these over. Okay, so the surface of my foot is no longer tacky. It's dried up a little bit. I've let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes. Depending on how much time you have left in class, if you need it to dry a little bit faster, you could put some dry paper towel around here, or you could just wait until the next class to do this. But once your clay is to about a dry leather hard, you're going to go through and you're just going to soften the edges of the foot just so that they won't be sharp. They don't need to be necessarily round, but you want them to be soft. So I'm just gonna just a couple times just gently go back and forth along that edge. I'm gonna look at my corners here and make sure they're not starting to pull apart. One thing I meant to say earlier, and I think I forgot, so I apologize. But I hope you've noticed as I've been working on my foot that I did not put a reinforcement coil on my foot pieces. There's a reason I didn't do that. One reason is we don't want the bottom to be too heavy. And adding, sorry guys. So we don't want our bottom to be too heavy. And also if we were to put a piece of clay here and blend it in, it's gonna make our it's going to make our bottom kind of lumpy. It's going to rock back and forth because it won't be as flat. So I'd recommend don't put a reinforcement coil on your foot. At this point, I can go ahead and carve my name and class code somewhere on the inside. Make sure your clay is at the dry leather hard stage before you do this.